Your card was declined in front of everyone. How humiliating.
Don't worry, darling. Security will remove him before dessert. This is a setup. You planned this.
It's over. Just leave.
My wife held my debit card between two fingers as if it were something dirty, then announced to 12 strangers that she had frozen it because she was tired of supporting a man with no future. Marcus Hale sat beside her in a building whose controlling shares had carried my family's name for 73 years, smiling as though he had finally put me in my proper place. "You won't embarrass me again, Daniel," Olivia said, placing the card beside my untouched plate. The private dining room occupied the 42nd floor of Arborcrest Bancorp's headquarters, with glass walls overlooking Charlotte and a brushed steel emblem mounted behind Marcus's chair. I had seen an older version of that emblem hanging above my grandmother's desk when I was 9. No one at the table knew that. To them, I was Olivia's underachieving husband. The credit union employee who had arrived in an aging gray sedan while she and Marcus came upstairs with the bank's executive delegation. Marcus folded his hands and spoke in the measured tone he used when making cruelty sound procedural. Olivia asked our private banking team to place a temporary restriction on the household account. Given the concerns she's raised, that was the responsible step. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others watched openly. Olivia had invited me to what she called a reconciliation dinner. I finally understood that I had been brought there as an exhibit. The waiter remained beside me with the payment terminal, uncertain whether to remove the declined transaction or try again. I could hear the soft ventilation above us and the faint clink of silverware from the far end of the room. Olivia mistook my silence for helplessness. "Say something," she demanded. Her voice had the brittle confidence she used when she had rehearsed an argument with someone else. Marcus leaned back, giving me room to fail. I slid the card away from Olivia and asked the waiter. "What message appeared?" Marcus answered before he could. "Insufficient authorization." "It happens." That was the first thing he said that made my humiliation secondary to my suspicion. A normal declined payment produced a standard code. A restriction on the account connected to that card should have triggered a protected profile notice visible only to certain bank personnel. Marcus could not know the wording unless he had seen the internal request. Olivia looked toward him before replying. Another small movement I might once have excused. "Marcus helped me understand how exposed I was," she said. "You hide statements, avoid every serious conversation about money, and act like ambition is a character defect. I'm done pretending your secrecy is humility." Her accusations struck harder because part of them was true. I had hidden more than statements. I had allowed her to believe limits existed where there had only been my fear. But truth inside an accusation did not make the spectacle honest. Olivia reached into her handbag and placed a cream envelope on the table. "I'm staying with my mother tonight. My attorney will contact you about the separation." Marcus did not touch her, but the closeness between them was practiced the shared glance, the synchronized pause, the way she waited for his approval before continuing. "He's also helping my firm compete for the Arborcrest redesign contract," she added, almost defiantly. "At least someone believes I'm capable of building something." 10 years earlier, she had said the same thing about me while we carried donated furniture into a flood shelter. I remembered her laughing when a broken cabinet collapsed in my hands. I remembered the apartment where we ate takeout on the floor because we could not afford a dining table. Those memories did not disappear. They simply became evidence that affection could be spent slowly, one compromise at a time. I stood, careful not to give Marcus the scene he seemed to expect. His eyes flicked toward a dark camera dome near the ceiling. That confirmed more than his smile had. "Before I leave," I said, "I'd like the name of the employee who authorized the restriction." Marcus's expression tightened for less than a second. "This is a marital matter, not an investigation." "Then it should be easy to answer." Olivia shook her head. "This is exactly what you do. You turn everything into a fraud case because it keeps you from admitting you failed." I looked at her and felt the clean, cold break of something I had spent years pretending was only strained. "No," I said. "Sometimes I investigate because someone planned the result before the event began." The dining room manager approached before Marcus could respond. Her nameplate read Elena Ruiz. and the color had drained from her face. She held a tablet against her jacket with both hands. Mr. Halle, I need to speak with you privately about the restriction request. Marcus rose halfway. Handle it downstairs. Elena did not move. Her eyes shifted toward me, then to the card in my hand. The account prefix generated a legacy escalation. She said carefully. The system rejected the freeze. Olivia stared at her. That's impossible. I'm his wife. Elena looked uncomfortable but resolute. You are not an authorized party on this account. Marcus stepped around the table, lowering his voice. Elena, you're discussing protected information in front of guests. General counsel instructed me to keep everyone here. The room became so quiet that I could hear the elevator chime beyond the doors. Marcus's composure finally cracked. Naomi Brooks is not involved in consumer card disputes. The doors opened before Elena answered. Naomi entered wearing a navy suit, followed by two members of corporate security. She had more gray in her hair than when I last saw her at my father's funeral. But her expression had not changed, controlled, unsentimental, and already disappointed in everyone present. She stopped beside my chair and studied me for one long moment. You chose an interesting night to come home, she said. Olivia looked from Naomi to me. Confusion replacing contempt. Marcus went completely still. Naomi turned to Elena. Preserve the terminal, the authorization logs, and every camera feed from this floor. Then she faced the table and used the name no one there was supposed to know. Mr. Voss Mercer. No employee of this bank had the authority to freeze that card. Naomi moved the dinner guests into an adjoining conference room while security sealed the executive floor. Olivia followed me into the corridor, still holding the separation envelope as if the paper could restore the balance of power she had expected. Who is Voss Mercer? She asked. I could have answered then. I should have answered years earlier. Instead, I looked through the glass wall at Charlotte's lights and remembered the first time she had watched me work. We met at a flood recovery center in West Charlotte, where families were trying to rebuild homes while scammers copied insurance documents and redirected relief payments. Olivia was 27, exhausted, and carrying a box of cabinet hinges under one arm. I was tracing a fraudulent contractor account from a folding table beside the coffee station when I stopped an elderly couple from wiring their last $8,000 to a fake restoration company. Olivia kissed my cheek before she even knew my last name. She said men who protected ordinary people were rarer than men who made money. For years, she meant it. We rented a narrow apartment above a bakery, shared one unreliable car. We'd celebrated our anniversary with grocery store cake. She designed community clinics and affordable apartments. I investigated forged checks, identity theft, employee embezzlement, and financial abuse. We were not pretending to be content. We were content until the lives around us became more expensive, and I continued acting as if questions about my past were threats rather than invitations to trust her. My legal name was Daniel Voss Mercer, but I had used Daniel Mercer since college. The Voss name belonged to bank buildings, charity galas, newspaper investigations, and a father I had spent half my life trying not to resemble. When I was 15, federal investigators accused him of hiding losses inside an Arbor Crest lending division. Reporters parked outside our school. Threatening letters arrived at our house. One afternoon, two men forced our car off a service road and tried to pull me through the rear door before my grandmother's security team intervened. After that, Margaret erased me from public view. She moved the family shares into a voting trust, placed professionals between me and the company, and told me anonymity was the only freedom money could buy. Years later, I learned my father had committed real offenses, but senior executives had also shifted blame onto him to protect the bank from panic. Margaret knew enough to stop it and chose institutional stability over the truth. That decision preserved Arborcrest and destroyed what remained of our family. Her succession terms required me to work outside the bank, complete training in risk management, and spend at least 5 years serving customers who would never enter an executive dining room. I fulfilled every condition, I simply refused to claim the authority waiting for me. I told myself I was rejecting corruption. In truth, I was afraid that control would reveal something in me I had inherited from both my father and Margaret. Olivia knew my family history was painful, but not why. Whenever she asked about my grandmother, I said we were estranged. When she wondered how I had paid off my student loans so quickly, I blamed a small education trust. When she suggested buying a larger house, I insisted we could not responsibly afford it. Although the family trust covered my basic expenses and held more wealth than either of us could have imagined, I never spent lavishly, but that did not make the deception harmless. I let Olivia organize her dreams around false boundaries. Then, when her career changed, I judged her for resenting those boundaries. Her first luxury client invited us to a private club where a managing partner asked what I planned to do after the credit union phase. Olivia laughed too quickly. On the drive home, she said she wished I wanted more. I replied that more was not the same as better, which sounded principled and spared me from answering what she had actually asked. After that came smaller cuts. She stopped mentioning my job unless someone asked. She bought me jackets I never wore and corrected the way I introduced myself. Her mother began telling her that love could become an excuse for settling. I watched Olivia change and secretly waited to see whether she would choose me without knowing what I owned. I never told her she was being tested. No marriage survives a test when only one person knows the questions. At 2 in the morning, I sat with Ethan Cole in the digital investigations room at Piedmont Community Credit Union. Naomi had allowed me to leave Arborcrest only after I promised not to contact Olivia, Marcus, or anyone on the board until the authorization logs were secured. Ethan listened without interrupting as I explained the trust, the bank, and the name I had hidden from him for 14 years. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You investigate deception for a living. Daniel, did you honestly think yours didn't count?" I had no defense. We examined recent access attempts tied to my credit profile, searching for anything that connected Marcus to the staged dinner. The first requests looked ordinary: marital asset searches, property checks, and identity verification inquiries made through a private due diligence firm. Then Ethan found a report commissioned 11 months earlier by a consulting company that shared an address with one of Arborcrest's vendors. Its title was Voss Beneficiary Exposure and Influence Map. The report identified my workplace, daily routine, old medical records, marriage, and Olivia's design contracts. It even ranked her professional insecurity as a high-value access point. Marcus had claimed he first met her 6 months ago at a corporate design reception. The report proved he had selected her 5 months before that introduction. Ethan opened the authorization page and turned the screen toward me. The client approving the research was listed only by initials, but the billing account belonged to the office of Arborcrest's Chief Strategy Officer. Marcus had not wandered into my marriage. He had mapped it, priced its weaknesses, and walked in through the door I had left unlocked. By sunrise, the beneficiary report had become a map of everything Marcus believed he could use against me. Naomi brought an Arborcrest security analyst named Priya Shah to Ethan's office, and together they traced the report's research requests through vendor portals, expense approvals, and archived email headers. I read each page while they worked. Olivia's design firm had been scored for cash flow pressure. Her mother's medical bills had been listed as a source of urgency. Our arguments about moving, travel, and my refusal to attend executive events had been reduced to colored risk categories. Marcus had not needed Olivia to be foolish. He had needed her to feel unseen, and I had helped create that condition. The records showed how methodically he stepped into it. First came a referral that placed her firm on a luxury office project. Then came invitations, introductions, and private praise copied almost word for word from the report's recommendations. Finally came questions about my accounts, my family, and the locked document case in our home office. Naomi slid one email toward me. Olivia had written that I kept old Voss papers but never explained them. Marcus replied that concealed assets could affect her rights in a separation. He never asked her to steal anything in writing. He made suspicion sound like self-protection and waited for her to volunteer access. The money trail was less elegant. Priya identified 3 consulting firms: Redwood Civic Partners, Larkspur Analytics, and Belmere Advisory, that had received monthly payments from an Arbor Crest real estate subsidiary. Each invoice described market studies or branch optimization, yet none contained work product. Ethan noticed that the payments increased whenever troubled commercial loans were moved into new entities. Naomi then showed me a credit committee summary signed by Rebecca Sloan, the bank's chief credit officer. Properties that had missed payments for months were still classified as performing because shell companies had refinanced one another's debt. The consulting firms appeared to funnel fees toward Northstar Meridian Holdings, the investment group pushing for an Arbor Crest merger. Marcus's office had approved 2 vendors, and Rebecca had approved the loans generating their fees. The purpose was becoming visible. Hide losses long enough to sell the bank's strongest assets, its deposits, branch properties, community loan portfolio, and financial technology unit, while burying the failing real estate debt in a disposable subsidiary. I asked Naomi why the board had not stopped it. Because weak numbers can look temporary when the people presenting them control the timing, she said. And because someone on the board has been warning Marcus whenever questions get too close. Priya recovered access logs from the executive document system, but one pattern disturbed Naomi more than the shell companies. Marcus's credentials had opened a sealed succession memorandum 8 months earlier, using an override granted through Director Leonard Price's office. The memorandum contained my full legal name, the trust's 61% voting position, and Margaret's succession timetable. It also contained a name almost no one used. In a recorded strategy meeting attached to the access file, Marcus referred to my grandmother as Maggie Voss while discussing whether the heir would resist a merger. Margaret hated that nickname. Only family correspondence and trustee notes used it. Usually when quoting my grandfather, Marcus had known not only that I existed, but when my authority could activate. Naomi preserved the recording without circulating it. Access showed misconduct, she explained, but not yet the full purpose behind it. I wanted to call Olivia and demand to know what she had given him. Instead, I opened the inventory from our home office, my passport copy, a childhood medical file, and several pages bearing my signature had been photographed. So had a sealed letter from Margaret that I had never opened. Anger rose, but it had nowhere honest to land. Marcus had exploited my marriage. Olivia had crossed the threshold. I had built the locked room they both entered. At 4:17 that afternoon, Naomi's phone rang. She answered, listened, and turned away from us. The change in her posture told me before she spoke. Margaret had died at a private hospital near Lake Norman after a sudden cardiac decline. I had not seen her in 9 months. Our last conversation ended with her accusing me of confusing avoidance with virtue, and me accusing her of protecting institutions more faithfully than people. Both statements had been true. Grief arrived without simplicity. I remembered her teaching me to read a balance sheet at 12, then ordering security guards to remove my father from a board meeting at 17. Naomi gave me 1 minute before returning to business, which was exactly how Margaret would have wanted it and exactly why our family had broken. The trust transition begins tomorrow, she said. There will be a memorial session at headquarters with the trustees, directors, senior officers, and immediate family. Your identity will be entered into the corporate record, and the directing beneficiary provisions will be read. I asked whether Marcus knew. He received the board notice 12 minutes ago. My phone lit up before she finished. Olivia's name appeared on the screen for the first time since dinner. Beneath it was a message from an unknown number containing only the memorial invitation and a warning. Do not assume the votes are still yours. Margaret's memorial was held in Arbor Crest's boardroom because she had left written instructions forbidding flowers, hymns, and sentimental speeches by people who ignored the quarterly reports. Her portrait stood beside the empty chair at the head of the table. Olivia sat near the trustees, separated from Marcus by 2 directors, but watching him whenever Naomi opened another document. I took the empty chair only after Charles Wynn, the independent board chairman, asked me to Naomi entered my birth certificate, the original trust declaration, and Margaret's death certificate into the corporate record. Then she said the words that changed how everyone in the room looked at me. I was the sole adult beneficiary of the Voss Family Banking Trust, which held 61% of Arborcrest Bancorp's voting shares. The trust did not give me $12 billion to spend. It gave me the right to direct its votes, nominate 4 of the bank's 9 directors, block a merger, and prevent the sale of designated community banking assets. 2 professional trustees still had to approve distributions, and I could not use bank property as my own. Charles studied me without warmth. Legal authority is not evidence of competence. He said, I agree. I replied. Across the table, Marcus's surprise looked almost convincing. Naomi read Margaret's final succession instruction. I could assume directing beneficiary authority immediately, provided I signed a governance pledge and disclosed any conflict that could impair the bank. Before I reached for the pen, Olivia stood. Her voice shook, but she did not sound greedy or impressed. She sounded furious. You let me plan our life around lies. She said, you watched me worry about bills, turn down opportunities, and apologize for wanting more, while you knew none of those limits were real. The room became an audience again. But this time I had created the stage. I told her she was right about the deception. I had hidden behind fear, called it principle, and tested her loyalty without her consent. But I didn't make you freeze my card in public. I said, I didn't make you give Marcus my documents. And I didn't make you help turn our marriage into evidence. Her face tightened. She said Marcus had convinced her I was concealing marital assets and preparing to leave her unprotected. That explanation was plausible enough to hurt. Yet it did not erase the deliberate humiliation at dinner. Olivia looked toward Marcus. He offered no comfort, only a small nod that seemed to remind her what came next. She placed a sworn affidavit before Charles, alleging financial coercion, concealed property, and unstable behavior after I learned of the separation. Marcus rose with a folder already marked for the board's counsel. He said the bank could not permit a disputed heir to seize control during a reputational crisis. Inside was a supplemental trust amendment bearing Margaret's signature and a provision Naomi had never mentioned. It authorized temporary suspension of my voting direction if allegations of financial abuse or emotional instability threatened regulatory confidence. Naomi read the first page twice, then examined the electronic certification block. This is not in the trustee archive, she said. Marcus replied that Margaret had deposited it with outside estate counsel because she no longer trusted the existing trustees to restrain me. Leonard Price immediately moved to recognize the amendment until a court determined its validity. Charles refused to vote without independent review. But Marcus had prepared pressure beyond the room. Phones began vibrating around the table. A news site had published Olivia's affidavit with security footage from the dinner. The clip began after my card was declined. It showed me rising sharply and reaching across the table toward Marcus. But not Marcus pushing my chair or mentioning my father moments earlier. 11 seconds were missing. The headline called me a secret banking heir accused of abusing his wife and concealing billions. Naomi ordered the media team not to respond until we secured the original recording. Marcus calmly requested an emergency recess. During the recess, I found Olivia alone beside Margaret's portrait. She asked whether I had ever intended to tell her. I answered with the only truth left, yes. But always after one more condition. One more proof. One more safe moment that never arrived. Then you didn't trust me, she said. Not enough. I admitted. She closed her eyes. And for a second I saw the woman who had once carried cabinet hinges through floodwater. Then Marcus entered with 2 attorneys and handed Naomi a court filing. He had petitioned for a temporary restraining order on behalf of 3 minority shareholders, claiming my immediate control could trigger depositor panic and interfere with an investigation into marital asset concealment. Naomi called the judge's chambers. But the affidavit, the edited video, and the disputed amendment had already done their work. At chasse, 4 și 2 M. An emergency order arrived, suspending my authority to direct the trust's votes for 10 days. Marcus used the opening at once. He scheduled a board vote on North Star Meridian's merger proposal for the following week. I had entered the room as the legal heir to 61% of Arborcrest's voting power. I left with the same ownership on paper. No vote I could exercise, and my face playing on every screen in the lobby beneath the word fraud. By the next morning, my face had become shorthand for everything people feared about inherited power. Television panels replayed the edited dinner clip beside photographs of Margaret's funeral, while reporters camped outside Piedmont Community Credit Union and asked whether I had used hidden wealth to control my wife. Arborcrest lost nearly $400 million in deposits before noon. Most of the money moved through online transfers. But the lines outside 2 branches gave the panic a shape no spreadsheet could soften. Charles Wynn called me into a video meeting with 6 independent directors. They did not accuse me of crimes. Their questions were worse because they were reasonable. Had I ever managed a bank? Could I reassure regulators without discussing sealed trust documents? Why should thousands of employees accept leadership from a man who had refused to acknowledge the institution until it was under attack? I answered honestly and watched honesty fail to solve the immediate problem. Marcus joined from his office and proposed selling Arborcrest's financial technology subsidiary and 42 branch properties to stabilize liquidity before the merger vote. The sale would give North Star the bank's most valuable assets at a discount. Olivia appeared outside the courthouse afterward and told reporters she had spent years questioning her own judgment because I controlled the truth about our finances. I could not call that entirely false, which made every misleading part harder to challenge. Naomi found me that evening in Margaret's lakeside house, sitting at the desk where she had once taught me that numbers reveal character only when someone asks who benefits. A public relations consultant had drafted a statement exposing Olivia's messages to Marcus, including her insults about my work and her plans to use the dinner to force a settlement. Releasing them might have shifted sympathy toward me. It also would have turned the collapse of our marriage into ammunition for strangers. I deleted the draft. That restraint may cost you the court order, Naomi said. Then we beat the order with evidence, I replied, although I no longer sounded certain. I asked what would happen if I renounced the directing beneficiary role and let the professional trustees negotiate with North Star. Naomi did not comfort me. She said the merger would probably pass. Hundreds of branches would close, and the concealed real estate losses would surface after the strongest assets had been transferred. Then she handed me a sealed envelope retrieved from Margaret's private safe. Inside was a small recorder and a note in her angular handwriting. For Daniel. When leaving feels cleaner than leading. Margaret's recorded voice was weaker than I remembered. She admitted that she had preserved Arborcrest by sacrificing truth during my father's scandal and had mistaken control for duty ever since. Power is not proof that you deserve obedience, she said. It is a debt to everyone who cannot afford your pride. I listened to the recording 3 times. Margaret did not ask me to preserve the family name. She asked me to protect depositors, employees, and borrowers from decisions made only to shelter powerful people from consequences. Her confession did not erase what she had done to my father or to me, but it stripped away my last excuse for treating withdrawal as moral purity. I called Ethan and asked for facts that could survive hostile review. By midnight, his team had reconstructed the restaurant's payment traffic and found that the freeze command reached Arborcrest's card system 7 minutes before Olivia placed my card on the table. The request originated from an executive terminal assigned to Marcus's office. Priya located an off-site security archive containing the full dinner video, including the missing 11 seconds. Naomi's forensic counsel identified another inconsistency. The digital certificate on the supposed trust amendment had been issued 2 days after Margaret entered the hospital. When her signing device was locked inside the trustee vault, none of those facts alone proved the entire takeover. Together, they gave us a path. I authorized Naomi to deliver the material to the court, the bank's regulators, and an independent audit firm. I refused her suggestion that we first show it privately to Marcus in exchange for his resignation. If this is larger than him, I said, a quiet exit only warns the others. Before dawn, we built the order in which the evidence would be presented. I would begin by admitting my own deception, because I would not ask neutral directors to trust a man who pretended his failures did not matter. Naomi would challenge the amendment's timeline. Ethan and Priya would authenticate the card logs and original video. The auditors would trace the consulting payments, while outside counsel sought records connecting North Star to the shell companies. One gap remained. We knew someone on the board had opened the sealed succession memorandum, but we could not yet prove what that person received in return. Charles agreed to postpone the merger vote for 6 hours and convene an emergency hearing with the trustees, directors, regulators, and council present. As I entered Arborcrest headquarters, employees gathered behind the security barriers. Some angry, some frightened, most simply waiting to learn whether they still had jobs. Olivia stood near the hearing room doors with her attorney. She looked at me as if she wanted to speak, then saw Marcus approaching and stepped away from both of us. At 9 o'clock, Charles called the meeting to order. Marcus placed the merger agreement in front of him. Naomi set Margaret's original trust beside it. I took the only empty chair and turned on the microphone. Before Naomi presented a single document, I asked Charles for 5 minutes on the record. Marcus objected that the hearing concerned corporate control, not my marriage, but Charles allowed it. I looked past the directors toward the employees watching through the glass wall and said what I should have admitted before anyone forced me. I had lied to Olivia by omission. I had allowed her to make financial decisions based on limits I knew were artificial. I had treated secrecy as virtue and loyalty as something I could measure without revealing the test. None of that justified the dinner, the stolen files, or the attempt to manipulate the bank. But I would not defend myself by pretending I had been an honest husband. Olivia lowered her eyes. Marcus smiled as if I had handed him the hearing. The beneficiary has confirmed the central allegation, he said. His conduct created a material governance risk. Naomi waited until he finished, then placed the disputed trust amendment on the display. She enlarged the certification block and showed that Margaret's signature had supposedly been authenticated on the Thursday after she entered the hospital. The certificate authority had not issued that credential until Saturday. Marcus said estate documents were often processed after signing. Naomi produced the vault record showing Margaret's secure device had been sealed 12 hours before the alleged signature and had not been opened until after her death. The first crack in Marcus's composure was small. He asked Rebecca for a file she clearly did not have. Marcus argued that a clerical discrepancy did not invalidate Margaret's intent. So Naomi moved to the second layer. Ethan authenticated the payment system logs while Priya presented the original security video recovered from Arborcrest's off-site archive. The room watched Olivia place my card on the table. Then the missing 11 seconds played. Marcus pushed the back of my chair as I stood and said quietly, "Your father made the same mistake thinking silence would save him." My hand moved toward him, not to strike him, but to steady the chair. The edited version had begun half a second later. Ethan then displayed the freeze request. It had been entered at 7:36 p.m. from Marcus's assigned executive terminal. Olivia did not ask for the card to be blocked until 7:43. Marcus claimed an assistant might have anticipated her request, but access records showed his badge inside his office and his authentication token active at the terminal. The dining room manager confirmed that Marcus had instructed staff to keep the payment device beside our table and ensure the failure occurred in view of the camera. The dinner had not become useful after I reacted. It had been designed to manufacture the reaction. Charles turned to Marcus and asked whether he had disclosed any role in arranging the incident when he supported the restraining order. Marcus stopped sounding polished. He accused Arborcrest's investigators of altering logs under my direction and demanded that the hearing be suspended. Charles refused. Independent auditors took the screen and connected Redwood Civic Partners, Larkspur Analytics, and Belmere Advisory to accounts funded through North Star Meridian. The payments had moved in circles. Arborcrest subsidiaries paid consulting fees. The firms transferred money to North Star affiliates, and those affiliates financed shell borrowers whose refinanced loans allowed Rebecca to keep failed properties classified as performing. One transfer ended at a company owned by Leonard Price's son. Leonard insisted it was a legitimate advisory business until outside counsel displayed a contract promising him a success payment if the Voss Trust lost the ability to block the merger. Rebecca claimed she had relied on valuation reports, but the reports were created by Larkspur, one of the same shell firms she had approved. The documents changed the director's posture one by one. They stopped looking at me as the threat in the room and began studying the people seated beside them. Marcus called the evidence a collection of unrelated compliance failures. Naomi answered by playing the strategy recording recovered from the sealed succession folder. Marcus's voice discussed the timing of Margaret's death, the trust amendment, and the need to keep the wife emotionally committed until the heir is neutralized. Leonard asked what would happen if Olivia learned the merger was already planned. Marcus replied that she did not need the future he had implied. She only needed to provide access, an affidavit, and a credible domestic conflict. Olivia made a sound beside her attorney that was closer to breath than speech. She asked Charles to stop the recording, but Marcus talked over her. He said private strategy language was being stripped of context and that Olivia had approached him because she feared me. She turned toward him. "You knew about Daniel before you met me." Marcus did not answer. Naomi displayed the beneficiary exposure report, including the line classifying Olivia as a high-value access point, her design contracts, her mother's bills, and our marital arguments had been cataloged months before Marcus introduced himself. Olivia stared at the screen as though she were watching someone else's life. She admitted giving him photographs of my documents and said he had told her they were necessary to protect her legal rights. Marcus responded that she had acted voluntarily. That was the moment she understood what I had already learned. Manipulation did not erase responsibility. But responsibility did not make the manipulation unreal. She did not ask me to forgive her. She asked Naomi whether her affidavit had been drafted from information Marcus already possessed. Naomi showed that its metadata originated on a North Star attorney's server 3 days before Olivia's first meeting with the lawyer named in the filing. Marcus stood and announced that the bank was facing a liquidity emergency. He said he had already obtained authority from an executive committee to transfer the financial technology subsidiary and several branch properties into a stabilization vehicle before regulators could intervene. He had chosen the wrong kind of transaction to hide from a fraud examiner. The proposed transfers were divided below internal review thresholds and routed through subsidiaries that shared directors with the shell borrowers. I recognized the pattern because I had spent 15 years investigating people who believed smaller numbers attracted less attention. I asked the regulator seated beside Charles to compare the destination accounts with the consulting payment network. She did, then ordered the transfers frozen pending investigation. Marcus tried to leave, but corporate security stopped him after federal counsel confirmed preservation orders for his devices. Charles suspended Marcus and Rebecca, removed Leonard from all board activity, and postponed the merger indefinitely. The independent directors voted to reject North Star's proposal and refer the loan concealment, data theft, forged amendment, and securities conduct to regulators and prosecutors. The court dissolved the temporary restriction on the trust after Naomi submitted the original records. I did not use the restored votes to appoint myself chief executive. Instead, I supported an interim leadership team, an independent credit review, and a governance amendment reducing the Voss Trust's direct appointment power unless future nominees met published qualifications. Charles asked whether I understood that I was surrendering part of the authority Margaret had preserved for me. I looked through the glass at the employees still waiting outside. "I'm using it," I said. For the first time, Olivia remained across the room, no longer beside Marcus and not beside me. The bank was still wounded. My marriage was still ending. And my family's name was no cleaner than it had been that morning. But the truth no longer depended on who held the loudest title. It rested in records, choices, and 7 minutes Marcus had believed no one would ever reconstruct. 18 months after the emergency hearing, Arborcrest was smaller, steadier, and finally honest about what it had nearly become. The independent credit review exposed enough concealed losses to force painful write-downs. But we sold no community branches and laid off no frontline employees to protect executive bonuses. Marcus and Rebecca were indicted on charges involving data theft, forged records, bank fraud, and securities manipulation. Leonard Price resigned before the board formally removed him, though resignation did not shield him from the regulatory case built around his son's contract. North Star Meridian abandoned the merger and entered litigation with its own investors. I testified when required and otherwise kept my distance. Justice did not need me standing outside a courthouse describing Marcus as a monster. The records described him accurately enough. Charles remained independent chairman, and the board appointed an experienced community banker as chief executive after a national search. I accepted a narrower role as trust representative and chair of the ethics committee. Subject to annual review, the Voss Trust still held voting control, but it could no longer appoint directors without published qualifications, conflict checks, and approval from independent trustees. Margaret had built a fortress around our family's authority. My first meaningful use of that authority was to put doors in it. Olivia and I finalized our divorce privately. The prenuptial agreement protected the trust, but I refused to use it as a weapon. She received our home, her share of our marital savings, and compensation for the years when my hidden resources had distorted decisions we were supposed to make together. She did not receive ownership in Arborcrest, and she did not ask for it. During our final mediation, she apologized without blaming Marcus, her mother, or the world she had wanted to impress. She said she had chosen public cruelty because it made her feel powerful at the exact moment she feared she had no power at all. I told her I believed that explanation, but understanding was not the same as rebuilding. I apologized for constructing a marriage around truths I controlled and then resenting her for failing a test she never knew existed. We signed the papers, shook hands, and left through different doors. Olivia rebuilt her design practice without Arborcrest contracts. I heard through our attorneys that she had begun working with nonprofit housing groups again. I hoped it meant she was finding her way back to herself, but I no longer treated her future as something I was entitled to manage. Forgiveness, I learned, could mean releasing the demand for a different ending. I kept my office at Piedmont Community Credit Union 2 days a week, where customers still arrived with forged checks, stolen identities, and relatives who had emptied accounts they were trusted to protect. At Arborcrest, we created a financial recovery program for fraud victims, small business owners, and families emerging from disaster. The program's first center opened on the 42nd floor in the space that had once been the executive dining room. We removed the private bar, lowered the marble counters for wheelchair access, and replaced the long table with workstations staffed by counselors, investigators, and volunteer attorneys. On opening morning, Elena Ruiz met me outside the glass doors. She had been promoted to Director of Client Protection after her decision to preserve the dinner records helped expose the conspiracy. My old black card still carried the legacy prefix, though I rarely used it. I pressed it against the reader, and the lock released with a quiet click. Behind me stood a line of people carrying foreclosure notices, disputed statements, and folders of documents they were afraid no one would understand. 18 months earlier, that card had been placed beside my plate to prove I did not belong. Now it opened a room built for people who had spent too long being told the same thing. I held the door and stepped aside. Ownership had once meant having the power to keep others out. The only version worth preserving was the power to let them in.